Hello, I'm Deepak Maheshwari, Senior Policy Advisor at Center for Social and Economic Progress, a think tank based in New Delhi, India. First of all, greetings to all of you on this day, the 28th September, which was decided as the International Day for Information Access at Universal Level by UNESCO way back in 2015. So, in that sense, it is the 10th year since it has been announced that way. When we are looking at information access, we need to consider this as a fundamental human right, which is inherent not only in the UN declarations, but also as part of most of the constitutions around the world, especially so in a democracy, whether it is India or elsewhere. Normally, when people think about accessibility, at times the thought is rather limited and the scope may be considered only to look at things from the perspective of physical, mental, or neurological disabilities. However, the fact is that access to information is something which is much more fundamental and much more innate for every human being in the world. Now, from that perspective, today I just want to talk about three specific instances in how we can use and realize this concept of using artificial intelligence for information access. So let me start with the first example. And this example has to do with the way people are doing things in India, but also it could be used elsewhere. Now, as many of you would know, India has a lot of diversity across regions, religions, languages, etc. So we actually have 22 official languages and hundreds of dialects in the country. Now, many of these languages are spoken by only a few people. And although we have made a lot of progress in the past several decades, still there's a level of illiteracy that continues to persist in India. Of course, that level is receding fast. Now, in this type of scenario, when you have people speaking different languages using different scripts, it becomes quite a challenge to do a translation across different languages. So what was done in India a few years back was that a project called Bhashini, which basically means languages, this was started. And the way it works is that if I'm speaking in one language, say Hindi, and I'm in a place where the other person is speaking in Tamil, we can still communicate through this platform very easily. And rather than creating 22 by 22 metrics of corpus, what was done in a very smart manner was that for each language, there was first a translation to English, and then from English to the other language. So this way, only 22 models would suffice what would have otherwise required more than 300 models. So that's one example. Second one that I want to mention is about the use of small language models, which could work actually at the edges level. So in India, we have something called common service centers. They have been planned across each of the 600,000 plus villages. So one center in each of those. And each center has typically about 10 to 15 computers. So you can think about it like a cyber cafe. Now at this place, it's not just that there's access to the government services. People can also use the same places for example, conserving their own languages, their own dialects, their local information about the flora and fauna and traditional medicine, etc. And that's something which can be curated there. You could use certain models there, and that's something which could be open sourced and be utilized by that community as well as elsewhere. So that's another example we have. The third example that I want to give is which pertains to the right to information or Freedom of Information Act, as it is known in many other jurisdictions. In India, we call it right to information. Now, yes, there's a right that people can exercise people can go to different government agencies, public authorities, seek certain information which is supposed to be in the public domain, and they can obtain copy of that. Now, typically the way it works in India is that you apply a physical copy or maybe on an email, you pay a certain small token fee, and then somebody will look into those documents, typically send you a photocopy of that document. Now, that's quite an arduous task, both for the person seeking the information as well as for the person or the entity providing this information. And in that scenario, it's quite possible that what I am asking or seeking that information, somebody else might have already asked or been provided. Now, I won't know that somebody else has already been provided such information, so it can lead to unnecessary duplication and avoidable efforts, both at the government level actually. So to address such issues, what we can easily do is that if there's a central corpus where all the RTI responses, the right to information responses, are collated at one place, and then one could use powering it through an AI model. That's quite possible for me, before I even raise my first query, to actually use that AI model, see if that information already exists. If it already exists, I don't have to ask it again. And that's something which it can save significant amount of effort, time, and money for everybody in the ecosystem, whether it is the people or for that matter the government, and that's something which can be utilized in a much better manner elsewhere. Now, to do all this, however, one fundamental thing is still required, and that is people should have access to such tools. And how would they get such tools? That means people should have access to digital access. And this digital access does not just mean having a mobile phone or a computer or having a connectivity. This actually means much more than that. For example, the universal and meaningful connectivity, a concept that's been championed and propagated by many institutions, including by ITU and UNESCO, also through the Broadband Commission. Now there, it is not just about having access to these devices or availability of a network, but also an ability to use them in a productive, safe, and secure manner. Now, the other thing that a universal and meaningful connectivity would do is to also enable people not just to be consumers of information, but also producers of information, which could be used by others. And that's a concept which one could think about as a prosumer, a concept that was proposed by the late futurist Alvin Toffler in the 80s. And this is something which would require, however, a big support, because there are a lot of places and people where commercially such services are not feasible. So people who are living in rural, really, or remote areas, or for that matter in small islands, it may not be actually commercially viable to take these services there. And that's why we do have mechanisms like Universal Service Obligation Fund or Universal Service Obligations of a different kind in different places. But most of these such efforts actually focus on supply side support only. What is needed, however, is that we should enable them to also provide support at the demand side, both for the devices as well as for the services. So device and service, and then of course the ability to use these things. So once we provide this type of skilling, it is quite possible that people of all sorts can use AI for information access. Thank you, and once again, best wishes on this particular day. Thank you.